There was a time when a trip to the seaside felt like stepping into another world. The smell of fresh fish and chips, the rattle of a ghost train on the pier, the thrill of racing down a Helter Skelter. From donkey rides on sun-warmed sand to the sweet crunch of a stick of rock, these moments weren't just pastimes, they were the heartbeat of a British childhood. Join us as we journey back to the 1960s, 70s and 80s to remember 20 seaside attractions every Brit once loved and discover what happened when the tide finally turned. Number 20. End-of-pier fireworks. On the best nights, the day didn't end with the sunset. Crowds would gather along the pier, faces turned skyward, waiting for the first crackle in the air. Then, boom! The night exploded in color. Reds, blues, and golds reflected on the water, mingling with the cheers of the crowd. For children, fireworks at the seaside were pure magic. You felt the vibrations in your chest, smelled the faint gunpowder drifting on the breeze, and clutched your parents' hands a little tighter as the finale built. These displays were community events, a gift from the town to its visitors. But as costs rose and safety concerns grew, many disappeared from the summer calendar. In memory, though, the fireworks still burst above the dark sea, the lights dancing on the waves, and the moment, fleeting but unforgettable, when everyone on the pier looked up together, sharing the same wide-eyed wonder. Number 19. Inflatable beach toys from the promenade shop. They hung in bright rows outside little seaside shops. Beach balls, lilos, rubber rings, and inflatable dinghies swaying in the breeze. For a child, they were irresistible. You'd press your face to the window, imagining yourself drifting just beyond the breakers in a bright yellow boat. Inside, the smell of vinyl and sunscreen mingled in the warm air. Parents would caution, "It won't last the week," but that never mattered. The joy was in having it, blowing it up until you were dizzy, and dragging it to the water's edge. Often these toys met their end with a sudden pop or slow leak, but that was part of the ritual. By the next holiday, you'd be ready to choose a new one. Today, cheap imports and changing safety rules have altered the seaside shop window. But in memory, it's always summer. The toys are always bobbing in the sea breeze, and you're standing there, coins in hand, ready to pick the one that will make this holiday perfect. Number 18. The bingo hall by the sea. The bingo hall was a world of its own. Bright lights, big numbers, and the constant murmur of concentration punctuated by bursts of laughter. Holidaymakers would crowd in after dinner, dabbers at the ready, determined to win anything from a teddy bear to a toaster. For kids, the draw was the atmosphere. The caller's sing-song voice rang out, "2 little ducks, 22," and the room would answer back in unison. It was social, it was exciting, and it felt grown up just to be there. Bingo halls boomed in the mid-20th century, but as gambling laws changed and newer entertainments arrived, many closed. Those that remain often feel quieter now, but in memory the hall is still full, a swirl of cigarette smoke in the air, cups of tea on every table, and the collective cheer when someone shouts bingo loud enough to rattle the rafters. Number 17. Seaside souvenir portraits. Long before smartphones and selfies, the seaside portrait was a treasured keepsake. You'd find artists set up along the promenade or tucked near the pier, easel ready, pencils sharpened. Some specialized in quick charcoal profiles. Others offered old-time photographs where you dressed in Victorian hats and frock coats. For a child, sitting still while the artist worked felt impossibly long, but the result, your face captured in bold, sweeping lines, made it worth it. Families often framed these portraits and hung them proudly at home, a reminder of a happy week by the sea. By the late 20th century, instant cameras and changing tourist habits made street portraiture rarer. Still, the memory lingers, the scratch of pencil on paper, the smell of the salty breeze, and the small thrill of walking away with a piece of art that was entirely yours. Number 16. The amusement hall dance machines. Before arcades were ruled by video screens, they had something stranger and, in its way, more magical. Behind glass, little mechanical dancers would twirl, kick, and shuffle to tinny music when you dropped in a coin. Some were can-can girls with frilly skirts, others were tiny jitterbug couples frozen mid-spin until the music started. For a child, these machines were mesmerizing. You'd press your nose to the glass, watching gears and pulleys bring them to life, convinced they were somehow real. The movements were jerky, the songs old-fashioned, but there was a charm to their imperfection. These machines dated back to early 20th century fairgrounds, but by the 1980s they were vanishing. Space in the arcade was better spent on newer, faster games, and the mechanical dancers quietly took their final bow. Yet in memory they're still moving, skirts swishing, feet tapping, and music drifting faintly over the clatter of coins, a little slice of seaside magic that felt like peeking into another world. Number 15. The Pier Head Theatre. At the far end of the pier, past the smell of fried onions and the crash of waves beneath the boards, stood a small theatre with a big heart. The Pier Head Theatre hosted variety shows, stand-up comics, and family-friendly musicals all summer long. Inside, rows of velvet-covered seats faced a little stage framed by heavy curtains. The acts weren't West End polished, but that was the charm. Local singers, travelling comedians, and novelty performers brought laughter and applause night after night. Families made an evening of it, fish and chips first, then the show, followed by a stroll under the twinkling pier lights. These theatres thrived in an era when entertainment was local, affordable, and shared in person. But as television boomed and holiday patterns shifted, many pier theatres closed or were converted into other attractions. For those who sat in the warm glow of the footlights, though, the memory is timeless. The sound of laughter rolling through the audience, the scent of popcorn in the air, and the thrill of a live show with the sea just beyond the walls. Number 14. Fortune tellers in glass booths. They sat at the edge of the arcade or near the pier entrance, mysterious behind a pane of glass. Sometimes it was a mannequin dressed in silks and bangles, hands hovering over a crystal ball. Other times it was a mechanical gypsy woman who would blink, nod, and shuffle a deck of cards as if she truly saw your future. You'd slip in a coin, the machine would whir to life, and after a moment, a little paper fortune would slide out. It might promise love, luck, or unexpected travel. Even if you didn't believe it, you'd keep that slip of paper folded in your pocket like a talisman for the rest of the holiday. These fortune tellers had been part of seaside culture for decades, blending fairground whimsy with a dash of mystique. But as arcades modernized and space grew scarce, the old machines disappeared. Still, if you close your eyes, you can hear the faint clink of the coin, the mechanical hum, and the feeling, just for a second, that maybe, just maybe, the seaside magic really could see your future. Number 13. Fish and chips in newspaper. Few things in life matched the joy of sitting on a promenade bench, unwrapping a hot bundle of fish and chips from a sheet of yesterday's news. The vinegar hit your nose before the first bite, steam rising into the cool evening air. You'd pick at golden chips with a little wooden fork, the fish breaking apart in crisp, buttery flakes. Seagulls circled hopefully overhead, their cries mingling with the sound of the waves. It was simple, affordable, and perfect. This tradition went back over a century, but by the late 1980s, health regulations banned the use of real newspaper. The new plain paper did the job, but somehow it never felt quite the same. For many, the smell of salt, grease, and ink is as much a part of the seaside as the beach itself. Even now, biting into fish and chips can carry you straight back to a summer night, legs dangling over the seawall, hands greasy and happy. Number 12. Open-air swimming pools. Before foreign package holidays became common, Britain's seaside lidos were our answer to the Riviera. They were vast, sparkling blue under the summer sun, often surrounded by Art Deco railings and sunbathing terraces. Families would spend the whole day there, staking out a patch of concrete with towels and flasks of tea. The water was bracing, even in August, but once you were in, you felt unstoppable. Kids raced to the diving boards, teenagers perfected cannonballs, and parents floated lazily, chatting to neighbors. The smell of chlorine mixed with salt air made the whole place feel fresh and alive. In the 1960s and 70s, lidos were packed on warm days, but by the 1980s, indoor pools and cheap flights to Spain began to pull crowds away. Many were left to crumble, their turquoise tiles fading under weeds. Those who swam there remember the shock of the cold water, the squeak of wet feet on hot concrete, and the way the sunlight danced in ripples across the pool floor. Number 11. Shell shops. They were souvenir stand, part treasure chest. Shell shops sat along the promenade, their wooden counters stacked high with the wonders of the sea. There were scallop shells polished until they gleamed, conch shells you could hold to your ear to hear the ocean, and tiny glass bottles filled with colored sand or sea air. For children, these stalls were magical. Each shell seemed like proof that the ocean held secrets, each trinket a reminder of a holiday too good to forget. You might spend your last pennies on a starfish pressed flat in a packet, or a shell glued into the shape of a little animal. Many of these shops had been run by the same families for generations, their displays unchanged for decades. But as the years went on, mass-produced souvenirs from overseas replaced the handmade charm, and fewer people bought delicate shells when fridge magnets were cheaper. Still, in memory, the shell shop door is always open, the salty breeze blowing in, and somewhere a little bell above the door jingles as you step inside to pick your perfect treasure. Number 10. The ghost train on the pier. It wasn't Disneyland, but to a child it might as well have been. The ghost train was a creaky, clattering journey into darkness, its painted facade promising skeletons, witches, and things that went bump in the night. You'd clamber into a little cart, the safety bar clicking down, and the attendant, usually wearing a grin, would send you off into the pitch black. The air grew cool, the sound of the waves faded, and you were suddenly in another world. Rubber bats swooped, skeletons rattled, and a cobweb, often just a bit of string, brushed your cheek. For kids in the 1970s, it was thrilling in a safe way, scary enough to make you squeal, but never enough to make you cry. The end always came too soon, bursting out into the bright sunlight with a nervous laugh. Ghost trains began disappearing as piers were renovated and health and safety rules tightened. But in memory, they still sit there at the pier's end, waiting for the next brave soul to venture into the shadows. Number 9. Seafront cafes serving Knickerbocker Glories. For a seaside child in the 60s or 70s, there was no dessert more spectacular than a Knickerbocker Glory. The name alone sounded exotic, but the real magic was in the glass. A tall, fluted tower layered with bright scoops of ice cream, rivers of strawberry syrup, slices of tinned peaches and clouds of whipped cream, all crowned with a wafer and a cherry. Seafront cafes served them with a certain ceremony. You'd sit at a formica-top table, watching the waitress carry your creation across the room like a fragile treasure. The spoon was long, perfect for diving right to the bottom for the melted mix of flavors. It wasn't just about the taste. It was about sitting by a window fogged with sea air, watching the tide go out, hearing the hiss of the coffee machine, and knowing you had the whole long afternoon ahead. By the 1980s, changing food fashions and the rise of chain ice cream brands made the Knickerbocker Glory rarer. But for those who had one, the memory is as layered as the dessert itself, bright, sweet, and utterly indulgent. Number 8. Crazy golf courses. Bright green felt, painted obstacles, and the satisfying clunk of a ball dropping into the cup. Crazy golf was the great seaside equalizer. It didn't matter if you were young or old, skilled or hopeless, everyone was in it for the fun. The courses were often wonderfully over the top, miniature windmills with spinning sails, little castles with drawbridges, ramps and tunnels that seemed impossible until, by some miracle, your ball found its way through. Families laughed, teased, and kept score on little pencils that were always too short and always broke. Crazy golf boomed in the mid-20th century as an affordable, light-hearted diversion. You didn't need special clothes or athletic skill, just the willingness to laugh at your own bad shots. Over time, some courses faded into disrepair, replaced by fancier adventure golf complexes or redeveloped into something else entirely. But the memory remains, the smell of the sea drifting across the course, the sound of gulls overhead, and that one perfect shot you still swear wasn't just luck. Number 7. The Waltzers. Even before you set foot on them, the waltzers had a way of pulling you in. You could hear the music, loud, thumping pop songs, and see the flashing lights from halfway down the pier. Rows of spinning cars circled a tilted platform, each one manned by a grinning attendant, ready to give you an extra shove just when you thought you'd slowed down. You'd clamber in, pull down the bar, and brace yourself. The first few spins were gentle, almost soothing. Then the operator would give the car a hearty twist, and suddenly the world became a blur of lights, laughter, and your own hair whipping across your face. Waltzers were a rite of passage. Older kids tried to act cool. Younger ones screamed and giggled in equal measure. Parents watched from the railings, smiling at the harmless chaos of it all. By the late 20th century, larger theme parks and stricter ride regulations meant many fairground waltzers vanished from the seaside. But in memory, they're still spinning under the night sky, the music still pounding, and somewhere an operator is still laughing as he sends another car into a dizzying whirl. Number 6. Seaside Miniature Railways. For a child, the miniature railway was pure magic. The engines looked just like the big ones, steam billowing, whistles blowing, only small enough to make you feel like a giant. They wound their way along narrow-gauge tracks, sometimes hugging the coastline so closely you could smell the salt spray, sometimes weaving through little tunnels and past model villages. You'd climb into the tiny carriage, knees tucked under your chin, and the driver, often in a proper railway cap, would give a cheerful wave before the train chugged into motion. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels, the breeze on your face, the thrill of passing waving strangers made the journey feel much bigger than it was. Many of these railways had their roots in the interwar years, built to delight holidaymakers looking for wholesome fun. But over time, maintenance costs climbed, land was sold, and fewer families sought out the slower pace of a tiny steam ride. Today, a few still run, kept alive by dedicated volunteers. But in memory, every seaside miniature railway still rounds the bend, whistle shrieking, with a line of happy, sunburned passengers heading for the little station by the sea. Number 5. Rock candy stalls. No trip to the seaside was complete without a stop at the rock candy stall. They were like little treasure troves, with rows of brightly colored sticks lined up like soldiers, each one bearing the name of the town running all the way through from end to end, a sweet magic trick that never failed to impress. Behind the counter, glass jars gleamed with humbugs, pear drops, and sugar mice, but it was the rock that stole the show. Strawberry pink, mint green, lemon yellow, the colors were as cheerful as a summer's day. You'd stand on tiptoe, coins clutched in your hand, debating whether to get the striped stick or the one shaped like a heart. Seaside rock had been a holiday staple since the late 19th century, a sugary souvenir you could take home to prove you'd been away. But as the decades passed, health-conscious trends, supermarket sweets, and changing tastes began to push these little stalls to the margins. Still, in memory, the paper crackles as you peel it back, the sugar crunches between your teeth, and the taste, impossibly sweet, just a little bit grainy, instantly takes you back to a wind-swept promenade in July. Number 4. Penny arcades. Step inside and the world dimmed. Neon signs flickered, mechanical clinks echoed, and the smell of fried chips drifted in from somewhere nearby. The penny arcade was a treasure trove for children in the 1960s to 80s, a place where a single coin could hold the promise of riches, or at least a handful of tickets to trade for a plastic trinket. You'd shuffle between rows of penny pushers, watching coins teeter on the edge, willing them to drop. There were one-armed bandits with spinning fruit reels, mechanical fortune-tellers with crystal balls, and whirring horse-racing machines that demanded frantic button-pushing. It wasn't just the games, it was the atmosphere, the constant ding and clatter, the friendly chatter between players, the way time seemed to vanish inside. For many seaside towns, arcades were the beating heart of the promenade. As the years passed, the pennies became 10-pence pieces, and the machines turned digital. Laws around gambling grew tighter, and the simple magic faded. But in memory, the arcade door is still open, the coins are still warm in your hand, and somewhere inside, a little metal arm is just about to push your jackpot over the edge. Number 3. Donkey rides on the beach. They were slow, gentle, and endlessly patient, the donkeys that carried generations of children along Britain's sandy shores. You'd spot them in a neat little line, each with a colourful saddle and a name painted on a wooden sign: Daisy, Charlie, Rosie. For a child, this wasn't just a walk on a donkey, it was a journey into a storybook. The sand shifted softly under the hooves as the donkeys plodded along, their ears twitching at the gulls overhead. A kindly handler walked beside them, leading the way, offering a steadying hand to little riders gripping the reins for dear life. Parents waved from deck chairs, cameras ready. Donkey rides had been a seaside tradition since the Victorian era, offering working-class families a touch of countryside magic at the coast. But by the late 20th century, things began to change. Animal welfare rules grew stricter, seaside tourism shifted, and fewer families sought them out. Today, they're far rarer, but for those who rode them, the memory is still vivid. The swaying gait, the scratchy mane under your fingers, and that quiet feeling that for just a few minutes you were on a noble steed bound for adventure. Number 2. The Helter Skelter. You could spot it from almost anywhere along the promenade, a tall, lighthouse-shaped tower wrapped in a swirling slide, painted in cheerful red and white stripes. The Helter Skelter was more than just a ride. It was a beacon for every child on the beach. Its very shape seemed to promise adventure. You'd clutch a thick, worn mat, rough to the touch, and climb the winding staircase inside, your heart thumping with each step. At the top, the breeze would hit you, carrying the salty tang of the sea and the distant cry of gulls. Then, with a push and a squeal, you were off, spinning around the outside in dizzying spirals, the wind in your hair, the boards rattling beneath you. For parents, it was a chance to stand below, camera in hand, ready to capture the moment you shot out at the bottom, mat askew, grinning from ear to ear. For kids, it was pure freedom. Helter Skelters began disappearing in the late 19th century, victims of safety regulations, rising insurance costs, and the lure of more modern attractions. But in memory, they still stand tall against a summer sky, waiting for the next brave rider to climb to the top. Number 1. Punch and Judy shows. If you grew up by the British seaside between the 1960s and 1980s, chances are you heard that unmistakable squawking voice long before you saw the striped tent. Punch and Judy wasn't just a puppet show, it was a seaside ritual. The little booth, painted in bright candy stripes, would appear on the sand as if it had always been there, the puppeteer hidden away, hands bringing those wooden characters to life. Mr. Punch, with his hooked nose and mischievous grin, was the star. Judy was his long-suffering partner. There was the crocodile, the baby, the policeman, all acting out slapstick scenes that had been passed down for centuries. Kids squealed with laughter, clutching dripping ice creams, while parents exchanged knowing smiles at the sly jokes tucked between the silly fights. The origins of Punch and Judy go back to the 17th century, but on a breezy British beach they felt timeless. You can almost hear the waves in the background, smell the salt in the air, and feel the warmth of the sand on your legs as you sit cross-legged, waiting for the next "that's the way to do it." Today, they're rare, victims of changing tastes and gentler sensibilities, but in memory, Mr. Punch still gets the last laugh. The seaside of the 1960s to 1980s wasn't just a place, it was a feeling. It was the anticipation of seeing the sea for the first time from the car window, the taste of salt on your lips, the sound of gulls overhead. These attractions, from penny arcades to fireworks over the pier, were more than holiday fun. They were milestones of childhood, woven into the fabric of who we became. Many have vanished, swept away by changing times and tides. Yet in memory they live on in perfect sunlit snapshots. And maybe that's the real magic. that long after the rides have closed and the stalls have shut, the laughter, the colours, and the warmth of those days remain. If you remember them too, share your stories below. Give this video a like and subscribe for more journeys back to the days we thought would never end.